10, California State University. We have two issues. The first, budget overview and enrollment. The second, graduation rates. And for the budget overview, we have with us Maritza Orquiza, Jason Constantoros, Ryan Storm, and Nathan Evans. We'll begin with Ms. Orquiza.
Maritza Urquiza, Department of Finance. The governor's budget continues to provide the CSU with significant flexibility to manage its operations and to achieve the administration's expectations and state priorities. The governor's budget includes an increase of $148 million general fund on an ongoing basis. This amounts to a total proposed appropriation in 16-17 of $3.2 billion for the CSU. The governor's budget also includes $35 million general fund for deferred maintenance on a one-time basis and $35 million in cap and trade funds on a one-time basis for energy projects. As described at the previous hearing, the framework by which the governor's budget approaches higher education is grounded in three efforts: to support success for all students, to maintain affordability, and to encourage greater alignment across the larger educational systems. Consistent with that framework, the administration has several expectations for the CSU. First, the administration expects that the CSU will reduce the time it takes students to complete degrees, namely to support students completing a four-year degree within 4 years. We commend the university's focus on increasing graduation rates, but given the magnitude of these challenges, the governor's budget calls on the CSU to do this work more quickly. As part of this work, the governor's budget expects the CSU to also continue to advance the reforms it has already initiated on the way it allocates dollars to campuses. The administration expects that the university will move towards a funding model based on student success that targets additional resources to campuses that are successfully serving the students with the greatest need. The administration also expects that the CSU remain affordable for students and their families. To that end, the budget expects that the university will maintain current tuition levels. However, the costs of college include more than just tuition. One of the many additional costs for students include textbooks. The administration expects that the CSU will continue to encourage greater adoption of open educational resources. These are free educational materials, and to continue to integrate technology as a way to reduce cost for students, increase access, and improve instruction. And finally, the administration expects the CSU to identify opportunities to expand collaboration with K-12 and the other segments to improve preparation and reduce the number of students identified as needing remediation. We intend to continue to work with the trustees, the chancellor's office, and other CSU leaders to understand how they are addressing these expectations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving now to Jason Constantoros from the LAO.
Jason Constantoros, LAO. Our comments on the CSU's budget proposal, the governor's budget proposal for CSU, excuse me, closely aligns with what we said for UC. We also think that the legislature could be more prescriptive in budgeting for CSU. We recommend thinking about budget year +1 targets for enrollment. And we also recommend working with CSU to develop a maintenance remark. So I won't rehash those again. I would just note one major change. In November, the trustees approved an expenditure plan under the governor's proposed funding, and that expenditure plan assumed a 2% increase in CSU's compensation pool. And CSU has now bargained much larger compensation increases than what was assumed in November. So you'll want to get a better sense from CSU of how that, its new expenditure plan under the governor's proposal. The other thing I'll just really briefly touch on is for the deferred maintenance item, the governor's proposing $35 million. CSU was able to provide us with a list of proposed deferred maintenance projects, and they mostly seem reasonable in line with the goals of the program. The one thing we would note is that there's an item there to fund an athletic field at a football stadium in Humboldt State. Normally, the state funds the academic programs of CSU, not so much intercollegiate athletics or student recreation. CSU indicates that the track is used for some academic purposes, so we're just trying to get a better understanding of that. So that's just a heads up right now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Constantoros. Moving now to the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Budget at CSU, Ryan Storm.
Hi, Ryan Storm. With me is my colleague Nathan Evans. What we'll do is we'll kind of tag team. I'll talk more about budget, and then Nathan, as his expertise will show, is going to be our enrollment expert here. What I wanted to do was walk you through this particular handout you see here in red. It's largely an abridged version of what you saw during the overview hearing, so I can whip through it very quickly. The first page and second page this is a particular shout out to Senator Morlock's request to align our revenue and expenditure pictures from our financial statements closely to the way. I may need that in a little bit, so I wanted to just really quickly point that out. That this does is this holistically shows you the entirety of the CSU revenues and expenditures. It does not talk about this specific support budget request, which we'll delve into a little bit later. So those 2 pages we can go through real quickly. Those are informational. Slide 4 shows you where the CSU budget has been general fund-wise at the high water mark before the recession, and then the gradual build-up to where the governor has proposed $2.9 billion. The next slide is a new slide that what I tried to do is try to show you the bookends of the prior slide. Showed you where we were in 7-8, where the funding was cut down to by an unallocated amount of almost $1 billion. And since then, there has been an unallocated increase of a little over $600 million. I want to leave you with the point that because on the prior slide, if you just glance at it and look at it grossly and say, oh, well, the CSU is back to where the general fund was back in the day, there are a number of issues that are embedded in that number, including, cost inflation has outstripped the ability for the university to do this. A lot of the additional money that has been added for the university has gone to provide the same sorts of services, such as continued retirement, because retirement costs have gone up, as well as health care. So the university is not out of the woods simply by looking at the gross numbers year to year, between almost a decade gap between there. Next slide, just informational, just showing that the general fund support has gone down and tuition has been a backfill over a longer period of time. Slide 7, real quickly, you saw before, but it's important to point out that the funds that were provided last year when the CSU's budget was fully funded, that we give you a report on where we are in terms of where we're spending it. And at your leisure, you can look through this list of items and we're basically telling you here that what we said we would spend that money on, we are going to do that. And probably the high water mark, what you see at the very top of that page is that we committed to enrolling about 12,000 additional students, and we're already just through the fall information at 11,800. And I think spring is just on the verge, if not available real soon. So we should be eclipsing that number. Real quickly, what I wanted to do is walk you through the support budget request for 16-17. These particular components of the request are very similar to what we've done for many years in a row, because they are all, tenants basically of what runs and what helps run a university. Basically, what the grand total price tag for this request is about $300 million. If you turn the page, what slide 9 shows you is the revenue side of the equation. How is this plan funded? We have committed as a university to hold tuition rates flat again through 16-17. That would be tuition rates have been consistently flat since the 11-12 fiscal year. If our support request is fully funded, we anticipate that we would be able to generate a net amount of almost $56 million of revenue from that 3% enrollment increase. And I have to definitely point out and acknowledge and send our appreciation to the administration that for the additional $140 million that he proposed in his budget. That is greatly appreciated. That gets us down the road here with a gap in this plan of $101 million, however. And what I wanted to do at this point was to talk a little bit about this request for an additional $101 million. This funding would allow the system to admit 12,600 additional students. It would direct about $50 million to student success and completion initiatives and make critical needed investments in infrastructure. In addition, the CSU and the California Faculty Association recently agreed to a 3-year deal that would increase faculty salaries about 10.5%, which was needed after years without limited pay increases. Now, this investment in faculty will cost the CSU an estimated $150 million spread over the 16-17 and 17-18 years. And my point I want to leave with you here on this particular point is that any increase in CSU's budget will help the system manage these costs and still make investments in other priority areas. As far as 16-17 is concerned, we feel very confident that we have a proper plan in place to be able to cover those. But the more permanent funding that the state is willing to provide for this particular endeavor, coupled with all of our other priorities, will make the CSU that much more stronger in the future. Last page basically shows you side by side that you've seen a few times, but it basically stacks up the CSU request on the left side. And if the state ends up funding at the $140 million level proposed by the governor, this is the mix of goods on the right that could be funded with those resources. And with that, I would like to hand off the rest of the presentation to my colleague, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Ryan. Nathan Evans, Academic and Student Affairs at the CSU Office of the Chancellor. And as Ryan said, I'll just walk through the enrollment picture for just a few moments. So last year, the CSU enrolled more than 470,000 students across our 23 campuses, which was a system-wide record. 94% of our students are California residents, and demand for CSU admission and enrollment continues to be at record levels, both as demonstrated by the demands for courses for continuing students and the over 407,000 applications that were submitted by unique students last fall. And while demand for admission and enrollment has continued to increase over the last decade, after addressing the inflationary cost and mandatory costs that Ryan talked about, resources to really support enrollment has been modest and incremental. I do want to point out that full funding of the CSU support budget for the current year, 15-16, is allowing, as Ryan referenced, for the enrollment of over 12,000 additional students that wouldn't have otherwise been accommodated in the CSU. And in managing our enrollment, our campuses really have to look not only at new student controls, but also continuing students as well. In the hardest times of the recession, campuses were really forced to reduce enrollment by either restricting the number of courses that continuing students could enroll within, or reduce the numbers of admission. And while the picture is markedly improved, the numbers show that demand continues to outpace our resources. So keep in mind, about half of our new students come to us as first-time freshmen, and the other half come to us as transfers. And while the pathway to CSU admission has remained constant, those are the explicit requirements for freshmen or transfers to come to the university, the number of students that are completing A through G courses in high school, as reported by the California Department of Education, that percentage continues to increase. And so to identify students that are qualified for admission or eligible for admission under the master plan, the CSU articulates very clear requirements to be within that eligible 1/3 of top graduates. And similarly for transfer students, articulates a set of requirements to clearly convey eligibility. I do want to point out that more, and actually exponentially more, transfer students are choosing the associate degree for transfer pathway that was made possible by Senate Bill 1440. So we are also seeing that effect and change on our enrollment patterns as well. And while outlining this basic eligibility is part of our outreach to students, to families, and to the schools and community colleges that we serve, and many times on individual campuses and individual programs, students that fulfill those minimum requirements far exceed the resources individual campuses or majors have to support them. And in those cases, our campuses apply for impaction. And essentially, that's the ability to use elevated admissions requirements to control that balance of demand and supply. That can happen at the freshman level, the transfer level, or in some cases both. It really is an option of last resort for our campuses to use impaction after they've used other means, like I said, controlling enrollment numbers, using and looking at capacity in our physical resources, online resources, but it is a reality that our campuses need to use that in many cases to align that demand with their available resources. Because our campuses do want to offer what we call authentic access. That is, the ability not only to have the resources to offer a student a place of admission, but know that we have the resources to get that student all the way to graduation. So in that impaction construct, that control construct, our campuses really fall into one of three categories. About a quarter of our campuses are not impacted at all. They are admitting any CSU eligible student from any place in the state that applies to that campus. Second, about half of our campuses at the macro level show demand that exceeds capacity, and so they prioritize admission of those students from their local admission area, admit those students, determine remaining space, and then use rank ordering for students outside of that area. Last, in about a quarter of our campuses, demand is demonstrated not only at the macro campus level, but down to the individual major. And in these cases, our campuses are designated as impacted by major. A student applying for chemistry may be held to a different standard than a student applying for business administration. And again, that's just to match the enrollment capacity to the resources that we have. It's important to note when I talk about all this that students typically apply to more than one CSU campus. The average for first-time freshmen is about 2 applications per cycle, and two for transfers and 3 for freshmen. So while a student may not be admitted to an impacted campus or program, the majority of students do find a place at another campus. But there are still a group of students that remain not admitted to any campus. And this year that number topped about 30,000 system-wide. Now that's a number I know that we've talked with you about in the past and we continue to have concern about. But over the last year we've spent more time really examining who those students are and what ultimately happens to those students after the application cycle. We find that more than 3/4 of those students only apply to one CSU campus. And in most cases, those are highly selective programs at selective impacted campuses. Those students are also applying at other universities, both in California, out of state, and all over the globe in many cases. So they are finding a place in those arenas. But we do find that about 8,000 to 10,000 students annually that apply to a CSU and are not admitted to any CSU don't appear to be enrolled the subsequent fall. And for those students, we have the greatest concern. And so as we talk about planning for the future and enrollment demand, it's really the focus on those numbers that we have the greatest interest. So in sum, we continue to see record levels of demand for student enrollment at all undergraduate levels. The incremental increases in state support are improving enrollment opportunities and helping support continuing students get to the finish line more quickly. And as the most diverse university system in the nation, we remain committed to offer authentic access to Californians, not only at the point of admission, but all the way to the baccalaureate degree. So with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Okay, well, thank you all. Have a few questions, then we'll hear from my colleagues. First question for finance. You kept saying the administration expects, and then there were several different things you called off. Are there hard, fast measurables by which you'll know at the end if the CSU has met your expectations?
We are working with the CSU. We're in conversations with that at this point. Those are still conversations that are happening.
Okay, because I think it's great. There, in some years in the past, I haven't seen the clear expectations. But the next step, of course, is not just the goal, but the measurables, and that we haven't seen yet. But you're telling me that by May revise or whatever, we'll have some measurables, or?
I think our goal, I think the LAO has criticized in the past and pointed out that the appropriation to the universities has been relatively flexible. And I don't think that we've understood it as kind of completely flexible. I think are trying to navigate a new way of engaging between the governor and the legislature with the universities. I think that's kind of a work in progress, but we hope to continue to make progress and to keep you apprised at the May revision and beyond of what that looks like.
Okay. In keeping with the discussion of having some measurables, if what I heard you say was you won't have anything by the May revise, you'll keep us apprised. Is there a date, whether it's 6 months from now, 17 years from now, is there a date by which you expect to have measurables that the CSU will have to meet?
Well, I think in the past few years, the legislature and the governor enacted a set of performance measures for several years now. Both the universities have reported on their goals. I think the narrative in the governor's budget was that the goals we saw in those sustainability plans, as well as the goals that we saw in the graduation initiative, I think were not what we expected to see. I think we wanted to see more progress, and so those are the conversations we're having. I think it's a nuanced discussion. I think we will try. Our intent is to keep you all apprised as soon as we can come to some sense of what that looks like moving forward.
And we appreciate that, but like with labor negotiations, if the contract never expired, there may never be a final agreement. But I think it would be helpful to everybody to have some date, a drop-dead date by which you hope to have an agreement. If not, then back to the drawing board, and maybe there's some consequence attached to it. But thank you for that. in talking about these different goals and expectations, it occurs to me that the CSU sets enrollment goals, UC sets enrollment goals, and actually graduation goals are more important than enrollment goals. And we'll talk about that in our next segment. But I'm not sure what's driving those goals versus PPIC tells us that we'll need 1 million more graduates with bachelor's degrees by 2025, I think it is. If we believe what they're saying, California Competes pretty much agrees with that. Have we broken that down? I mean, to get 1 million more, I mean, I'm not sure how many students the CSU graduates per year in the whole system. You probably know that.
Yeah, but just over 100,000 annually.
Okay, so if you add that together with what the UC graduates with bachelor's degrees per year, what the private institutions graduate per year, if people keep going at this pace, will we get to the 1 million by that year? I think PPIC said no, we won't because we'll be 1 million short. That's what they're saying. So we need to actually increase by 1 million by 2025. And now community colleges having the right to offer a limited number of 4-year degrees will add a little bit to that. But how are we going to get there? I mean, has anybody, it's almost like the pension issue or employee retirement. There are some things we just don't want to talk about because we're not going to be able to do what we need to do. At least we don't see how we're going to do it. That's my question. If you get a question out of there, give me an answer.
This Nathan Evans again from the CSU Academic and Student Affairs. And to your point, this is something we'll talk more in depth about in the next session. But as we've looked at what we are setting our own targets for our graduation initiative 2025, we aligned that with not only the information from the PPIC report, but some of the other national agencies that work in this area, Ed Trust and others, to really shape, okay, if we are incrementally increasing and improving our graduation rates, what do we need to do sort of year over year to get to our share of that? Now it's actually 1.1 million.
Yeah, by 2030.
Yes, exactly. So what do we need to do for our contribution? And so, yes, that has informed our own goal setting as we're setting our graduation goals for our campuses and then working back to the metrics that get us to that point.
And with no CPEC anymore, because the governor blew pencil that several years ago, is anybody coordinating? Because we don't really know what your share is unless we know what the whole is. And somebody needs to know what all the various segments are producing. If in fact this 1.1 million is accurate, the total has to come out to 1.1 million just for California to stay competitive. Maybe that's something somebody needs to, would that be the administration? I mean, since there is no CPEC, I mean, each segment's responsible for their own, but who's responsible for the overall?
I think you would say the governor, the legislature, the state policymakers are. I think we've approached our conversations with the CSU probably from not looking at that overarching number and working down, but looking at what does the system do today and what is a reasonable way to make more significant progress than that. So I don't think we've kind of allocated shares of that number to each of the segments, but we think it's a reasonable conversation to at least have, or at least a conversation that's easier for us to grasp. Look at what you do today and figure out how much progress you can make.
Yeah, what you're doing is certainly reasonable, and that's the more practical way to get to budget. But if in fact this is where we want to go, it doesn't take into account what the target is. Maybe we should start looking at what we need and work down from there instead of trying to work up. That's just, okay, I'll stop now and I'll ask my colleagues. Any questions?
Yes.
Senator Morlock.
Yeah, first we want to thank Ryan Storm for a really great presentation. Well done, young man. That's what I'm looking for.
I should jump in, sir, and say that our overall budget is $5.4 billion, and you can find our budget at calstate.edu/budget. Preempting your questions right out of the gate.
Keep going.
I'll let you ask your question, and pardon me for interrupting you,
Well,
sir.
let's have fun with page 9. Just I'm trying to do the math here. My notes tell me that the governor wants to give you a $148.3 million increase, and you're saying it should be 297, and you're saying the delta is 101, and I'm not coming up to that when I do the math. So I've tried that, the 55.9, I'm still,
The delta is $7.9 million, correct? on
okay,
your-
that could be it, that could be the
That's it.
squeeze.
And what it is it's just a representation of the, leaving out
Here it
one.
is, okay, the lease revenue bond
Right,
service.
so lease
there.
revenue bond service, it's
Okay.
that number.
Thank you.
So really what we have with that is that we have a number of buildings that are coming online during the 16-17 year. What the administration is doing is providing the fundings for those projects that were commitments made by the governor and the legislature before the capital authorities were shifted to the CSU. So they're following through with their commitment, the state's commitment in their proposal to fund those projects that they've made decisions on. So that's the delta.
So then your 101 million additional request, how much of that would be the new pay raises you've just negotiated?
Well, it's hard to really put a price tag on that right now. One of the clear one-time solutions that we have for 16-17 is that in 15-16 we did not have fully 2% compensation costs that year, because with the tentative collective bargaining agreement with the California Faculty Association, the costs are actually being borne predominantly in 16-17. So their share of the compensation piece on a one-time basis is saved in 15-16, can be used on a one-time basis in 16-17 to fill that gap. Okay, so that's one part
If
of
the
it.
governor agrees.
If the governor agrees, I guess, yes, it's true. That's true.
Okay, so it's possibly there.
Yes. If monies were not reverted by the state of California, yes, the money would be there to do that.
Okay. Then how much would this pay increase represent? Is it 30 million? Is it?
It's preliminarily, we are estimating that it would be a permanent cost starting in 16-17 of $68 million.
68? So
Yes.
2/3 of what you're asking for is salaries.
Yeah, but I think the piece about this that I think we'll have to work on as a collective group here is that not only have we already, within this budget request and within the amount provided by the administration, a large chunk of that money that has been provided through the multi-year funding plan is able to pay for a significant portion of this baseline amount of the agreement. So that delta, that 68 million, can have a one-time fill. It could be provided by the state to assist as much as we can, as I stated earlier, now versus in the out years. The other option too, obviously, with general fund being the principal funder for the CSU, the other option too is that if it is not supported through augmented monies, then obviously campuses will have to find creative means in which to pay this cost. So that's the rub. But in 16-17, I think I'm pretty confident that we're there. We are there. We're able to meet it. The challenge will be in 17-18 and beyond, obviously.
So does that then impact tuitions?
As of right now, our plan is not to raise tuition.
So if a recession occurs, what happens?
Well, I mean, that then shifts the entire paradigm, right? The way that it has historically happened when recessions have hit and the state has had to make reductions, there have been reductions within the CSU, other segments of the state, of the university structures, and ultimately that is the challenge that the CSU is trying to get through. As you might recall, we had a report that came out called a report for the sustainable future of the CSU, and within there are a number of key ideas that would try to smoothen out this boom and bust cycle that happens with recessions, which is, as you know, every time there is a recession, there are reductions that happen at the CSU, and consequently, in order to fill the gap with the CSU only predominantly being funded by general fund and tuition, that we have as a system had to resort to tuition hikes, and nobody wants to do that. But I think that other plan, that task force, has a number of creative ideas, including the idea of expanding our investment authority so that we can have a better rate of return, so we could tackle some of our capital needs. Really ways in which we can minimize the effect on our operating costs when those booms and busts come through. So we're aiming for a longer term horizon, using that report to guide us, and using obviously the opportunities here in trying to develop and create permanent funding structures through the state budget process. But I think I think we have a lot of tools at our disposal here going forward.
So when you negotiated, did you discuss having a pension program similar to the UC system?
Under my understanding is that under current law, we are very much similar to the way that other state agencies are structured. We actually are part of the CalPERS system routinely every year.
So the UC system has its own pension system.
That's right.
You do not.
We do not.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Senator Allen. Okay, one last question for me then. With you guys sitting over there, I forget all about the LAO. Because when I asked about the PPIC goals and have we done any studies to look at how we get there, I didn't ask the LAO. Have you guys done anything and what have you found?
We haven't done any study particularly on how to achieve the graduation targets that PPIC has recommended. It's not really part of state policy at the moment. State policy still emphasizes access, and so that typically is what informs our enrollment recommendations. So we haven't looked at that issue yet.
Okay, maybe we could talk to Director Taylor about looking at that issue. I think that's important that we have, if we think that the 1.1 million by 2030 or something close to that is realistic and really what the workforce needs to sustain, then isn't that something we should be looking at now? It's only, it's on the horizon. How do we get there? So if LAO would take a look at that, I think that'd be informative and maybe help to drive good policy. So thank you for that. Anybody else? Seeing none? Oh,
I just want
Senator
to,
Allen.
Mr. Chair, and I'm going to have to go in just a couple of minutes.
Sure.
I've had to shuffle some plans already just
Sure.
to be here for here. So I apologize for the next panel, but I'll stay as long as I can.